and I represent an area of Woji River Federal Constituency from Enugu State. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, it is very clear, and I want to thank Mr. President for being honest with this budget. He acknowledged on page 8 of his presentation that he was breaching the law by exceeding the deficit of 3% allowed by the Fiscal Responsibility Act. The deficit has, by convention, risen.
What's your point of order?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Honorable colleagues, my name is James Abiodun Faleke. I represent Ikeja Federal Constituency. Mr. Speaker, I rise to respond to statements made by both Honorable Bila and Honorable Toby, allegedly saying that Mr. President accepted that he's breaching the law. The proposal before us, Mr. Speaker, the budget proposal before us is an estimate, it's a proposal. And it is only when we pass it that we put life into it that it becomes law. So there is no way here that Mr. President says this is a must that has to be done. And so we should be mindful of the language that is being used. And of course, we are also aware at the committee level that an amendment proposal is also coming for the Fiscal Responsibility Act. Thank you.
Proposal and estimates, and that's why it's been laid for debate. And what we're debating is the general principles, not so much the details. What about us sustain? Honorable Toby.
And I want to thank Honorable Faleke. But I don't think it is untoward for me to say clearly that Mr. President was honest by what he brought to Parliament.
Was what?
Honest. He was very forthright about it. That the convention practice and our Fiscal Responsibility Act allows 3%, and that has been exceeded by 0.64%. It's very clear on paper, and I can read.
It's a proposal.
Just a moment, sir.
Mr. Speaker, you have ruled over this.
No, just a moment. Please, let me drop my point. So I was...
Honorable Toby, he's made a point. We've hit the gavel on that particular point. Let's just move on. Let's move on. Yeah.
Okay. We will proceed. We will proceed, and I leave that point of the deficit provision, which Mr. President had alluded that it represents the deficit.
You have 1 minute.
Okay. Well, Mr. Speaker, I represent the opposition. We should be allowed to have our say.
No, but you were continuing to try to make the point. You know, there's no point being clever by half. You know,
okay. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Yeah, so just continue. Just move on, because you're taking your own time. Because you're opposition does not mean that you will speak inordinately forever. So everybody is timed. And if you want to use your time to continue to argue a point that we've hit the gavel on, it is your feel free. But we're timing you.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm guided. Let me use my time. Mr. Speaker, in 2014, the budget of the Federation was 4.6 trillion. Today, the budget of this Federation is 13 trillion. But when you compare and use the exchange rate, they all boil down to about 30-something billion, which means there has been a lot of motion without movement. Mr. Speaker, the provision for subsidy in 2014 was 268 billion. I appreciate the effort to christen and baptize this budget as budget of recovery and resilience. But we have not been told what has been spent on subsidy and on that recovery for the past 4 years, no matter what name you give it, Mr. Speaker. Parliament needs to know, and to what extent that has been plowed into 2021 budget. The recoveries that has been made by the deregulation. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, it is important for us to know that the Committee on Finance did a thorough work regarding some leakages with regard to agencies of government. Some of them are remitting 25% because that's the policy. Some are not remitting at all. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, in our very eyes, there is a lot of expenditure being done by parastatals and agencies of government. And I'll take one. It is on record, Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, that the CBN has spent a whole lot of money in various interventions, close to running a parallel government, without appropriation. Mr. Speaker, if they have autonomy that allows them to trade with some of the monies in their custody, they should be prudent to report to Parliament what they've made. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, how I wish that the Parliament can guide them and provide appropriate information with regard to what our constituents want. Mr. Speaker, these various interventions, as of today, Federal Ministry of Works is owing about 300-something billion of liabilities. That is work done. And we have interventions that are so passive. What if they take this part of these trillions of intervention and say, Federal Ministry of Works, please, we are intervening. Provide Nigerians with roads. Let us offset your liabilities, and you give us an appropriate framework to pay back that money. That would be a country working. So I believe that we need to go back. And even the 25% we spoke about, Mr. Speaker, CBN is not remitting. And the Chairman of Finance Committee can also have a point of order in this direction to affirm or not to affirm this story. But they are not remitting. And you can know what the Nigerian people are suffering and losing. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, you see, we must err on the side of prudence. But this Parliament may have occasioned that. Mr. Speaker, I'll tell you a story. This rail line from Port Harcourt to Maiduguri and the one from Lagos to Kano were commenced, we envisioned the same day. And that was in 1913. And they were done basically for economic reasons. If there's any rail to be done in this country, there are those ones. Because they touch all the arteries of this country. And they will affect fundamentally the insurgency you have in the Northeast, the agitation you have in the Middle Belt, and the agitation you have in the South-South and the Southeast. And I have no doubt that when the rail from Lagos to Kano is completed, it will address some of the challenges we have, the banditry and the rest, because our young people will begin fully engaged. So I want adequate attention paid to this. It has to. But Mr. President must also watch those who he's working with regard to application of resources. If we are supposed to be doing rail, Mr. Speaker, we should not be doing fencing. We must have to subject these things to scrutiny. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, this budget reminds me of the myth of Sisyphus. And the myth of Sisyphus goes with the story that the Greek gods had, in one of their sessions, condemned Sisyphus, who was a fellow god, to perpetual perdition. And his punishment was that he must roll a stone to the mountaintop. Each time he rolls the stone to the mountaintop, his punishment is that that stone will roll back. And he will perpetually roll that stone. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the story of Ajokuta, if we don't overcome it, we are just children of Sisyphus. You have been there. You moved a motion for an infrastructure bill for it to be attained. We must overcome that perdition. Mr. Speaker, honorable colleagues, the story of Nigerian Rail. As a young man in primary school, I used to go from Enugu to Zaria on rail. And from Zaria, I would transport by road to Dusemma, which is in present-day Katsina State. Mr. Speaker, if we don't overcome the issue of rail by having a focus to these two primary networks, to these two primary economic corridors, Port Harcourt to Maiduguri, Lagos to Kano, Mr. Speaker, will be children of Sisyphus. Honorable colleagues, for whatever intervention we have to do, I'm sure my colleagues are happy with the story I'm telling because we are touching the nerves. Mr. Speaker, if we don't devote some money to regard to Nigerian roads, you'll find out our contract will run for 20 years. You finish kilometer 0, by the time in 5th year or 7th year you get to kilometer 20, kilometer 0 or 1 is developing pothole. If there is any intervention that has to be done, we should pay attention to the road infrastructure in this country and the enabling framework for tolling them to make sure that the roads can maintain themselves and pay back for whatever loan is taken to build them. We will be children of Sisyphus if we don't do this. So, honorable colleagues, the die is cast. The responsibility is ours. I am happy that the chairman of finance has acknowledged here that this is a proposal. We have to retool it to make it to work for Nigerians. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Honorable. I feel for the children of Sisyphus, and we thank God that the Greek gods are different from Nigerian gods. And we will not suffer the same fate of those children. And if we have to go and beg the Greek gods, we'll go and beg the Greek gods. But good analogy. Toby made some very fine points, particularly on the issue of remittances. And I think we are all on the same page on that. Well, we have to look for ways and means to make sure that remittances are made and form part of the revenue of this country by government agencies. We have to amend our laws if need be, and there are loopholes and wastages in that area. CBN acting ultra-virus is one of the things I've always said. You cannot, what the president of Nigeria, cannot do, nobody else can do. You cannot spend money without approval of the legislative arm of government. I totally agree with you, Honorable Toby.